Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to SCDawah Live. Today we are discussing morality without God. And with me today is YUSUF Ponders and Imran Hassan. Assalamu alaikum, guys.
Wa alaikum salam.
How's everyone?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
That's good. There's a bit of an echo, I think. Has anyone got another tab open or anything?
Speak again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there's no echo though.
There is an echo somewhere.
It's probably 1 second.
Yeah, there you go, Imran, isn't it?
Oh, can you through the room?
Through the door.
Through the door. Okay, it's good. Well, we didn't have this last time. It should be fine now. So what we're going to be speaking about today is morality without God. Is it possible that we can have a moral system, an ethical system, a value-based system without the divine, without a creator? Okay, so to start us off, let's start with the question, is it even important to think about morality? I mean, isn't morality a bit abstract thing, something that philosophers worry about? For the average Joe, you know, why would it matter, this question, can you be good without God? Why would it make any difference?
It's a good question. So I would say it matters because we have to figure out how we're going to live together. And if there's morality, can be seen as sort of like a binding code between people, in terms of like how we agree to treat one another. You know, whether or not if someone treats us a way that we wouldn't want to be treated, like to what degree can we rebuke them for that? You know, there are things along these lines. So it's important because, you know, you look at today's society, these questions are popping up more than ever. And we have massive issues politically, even within the West, against the West. Like you have a massive split between left and right now. And they're disagreeing on more things than, you know, probably have ever been disagreed on. Everything from abortion to, you know, what constitutes equality exactly. How do you implement that? Do you do it with positive discrimination or not? You know, all of these things are massive questions. And then with racial justice as well, this is all discussions on, you know, what do we consider moral? What do we consider right and wrong? What is correct behavior and what is not? So these questions are inevitable. We have to ask them. The question is what are we rooting them in? And this, when you start looking into like morality and just ethical philosophy in general, it opens up into a massively complex conversation.
Yeah.
And it can become quite a black hole in terms of how much reading there is to do. So I'm doing like a little thing every Friday at the moment with Brother Hood, who you had, the French revert brother.
Yeah.
Where we're going over a few things. So at the moment we're going over moral relativism. And we're going through the articles on the Plato Stanford, and then there's this book that I've got at the top. I don't know if you can see the yellow one there.
Yeah, big one.
Yeah, the Companion to Ethics. And yeah, there's just so much to say on just one. We've done 2 episodes on moral relativism so far, which were like, the first one was maybe 2 hours, second one's nearly 3. And just on that one subject of moral relativism, like we've spent 3 hours and we've not even gotten nearly even halfway through, maybe a quarter of the way through one article. SubhanAllah, there's so much to say on ethics, on morality.
And it impacts everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
Everybody's impacted by it. You know, it's not one of those things that, all right, let's speak about the entropic principle, or let's speak about an abstract idea which no one really cares about.
Mm-hmm.
Ethics is something that everybody cares about. It's important. Imran, ethics.
Yes,
is it important to speak about ethics when it comes to atheism?
Well, I think
should we just God's existence and ignore ethics?
Well, I don't think we can ignore ethics, as Yusuf said. It's so integral to the human condition, bro. Like every aspect of essentially, it's what makes us human. If you want to see it that way, you know, is that as human beings, something that distinguishes us from other creatures is that we seem to consider and think that we are upright, you know, conscious, ethical human beings that are concerned about doing what's good and doing what's right, as opposed to doing what's bad and what's wrong. So it's an integral part of our existence, bro. We can't run away from ethics. We can't run away from morality. And yeah, so I think that's the first thing. It's a very, very important thing. And secondly, I think the point that we would make as theists or Muslims in particular is that, well, when you do away with the idea of God, when you do away with God, you land yourself in a position where you can provide accounts for ethics, morality, but you cannot, if you like, objectively ground or anchor morality in something which is beyond your subjectivity as a human being, beyond your subjective plane. And that's the real question here. I think that's where you run into problems, which obviously we'll discuss, I guess, as we go along today, inshallah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just for everybody watching, a quick reminder, we're talking about morality without God. Hamza Stotzi is going to be joining us very soon. And this is a topic which so far the speakers have agreed is very important. And we'd love to hear from atheists if they think this is an important topic, if they think there can be morality without God, what are the implications that atheism has for moral norms. So I just wanted to add something to this. You see, right now in the world, there's a massive movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Because of the death of George Floyd. And there is this upheaval, there's this sense of injustice, this sense of rage, this sense of anger, this sense of, urgency to deal with this issue. And it kind of reminds me of many social movements across history, which started off with a spark. There's something that broke the camel's back. And it leads to a type of collective human behavior, this collective mobilization. If I go out to a crowd of people and I speak about a moral issue, whether it's George Floyd or it's, the Vietnam War, something emotive, something powerful, people react, and you can see it moves them. And if you say, we have to sign this petition, we have to go to this march, we have to do this action, they will react. In fact, they will cheer, and you will see a lot of emotional action. Yet if I go out to the same crowd and I say some analytical truth, and I say A squared plus B squared is C squared, or 1 + 1 is 2, or the size of the universe is this big, right? No one's going to be moved. No one's going to be, impacted. No one's going to say, right, I'm going to take action. Because it's not some logical, abstract truth that moves us. It's essentially morals. It's essentially ethics. It's the sense of justice, right and wrong. And those things are not purely something that you can just measure or you can put in a test tube. You can't prove them the way that you prove, for example, this is, blue or whatever, right? Or this is a cup. You can't do that. They're not tangible. They're not physical. So if that's the case, then the question is, how can atheists justify it? Because atheists are empiricists, and they don't really believe in anything that's subjective, anything that's not really tangible, a lot of these militant atheists. So how would you explain to an atheist that they need to give a justification for morals? Starting with maybe you.
So we need to agree what we're rooting it in so that we can overcome certain differences. So there are certain ways of approaching it, and you can either look at it in terms of, like, you have the moral subjectivist. There is distinction between these things, and they often get kind of conflated as one thing, but inshallah we're going to kind of expand on that on my Friday sessions. So you have moral subjectivist, which just says morality is whatever the subject decides it is. So it's a personal thing, kind of like what the video, the optimistic nihilism that we watched yesterday, was trying to suggest. Just there is no objective principles in the world in terms of these things, and so you've got to kind of make up your own mind about what it is. That would be like subjective. Moral relativism derives from empirical studies. So they basically look at the world and say, well, empirically, we can say that there are multiple cultures with multiple moral norms. And we can see that this is the case. But they wouldn't say that it's based in what a particular person thinks it is. they would say that what is right and wrong is dependent upon a group of peoples, and it is right within their paradigm or within their community, and becomes different if you leave that community. So, for example, polygamy is not okay in one place and it is okay in another. And for the moral relativists, they say that it is, and this is weird as well, because they talk about it as if it's objectively so that it is morally permissible in a community that considers it morally permissible. So there's a level of objectivity within moral relativism, and when you leave that and go to somewhere where it's not, they abhor polygamy, then it becomes objectively the case that it is wrong within this community. And then there's all sorts of issues that arise from this. So at what point how do we resolve these things when these communities clash, or they intermingle, or they have to deal with one another, or they overlap? How do we view the moral system, with regards to this? And so there's moral relativism, which is like a communal thing. There's moral objectivism, which says that like morality is some sort of entity that exists out there beyond the human being, but it's a very abstract way of looking at the world. It's not very clear how exactly you justify this without, say, like a transcendental being, i.e. God. There's many different ways of approaching it, and there's a lot written on each of these. And people, they generally tend to oversimplify a lot of these problems. And this is especially with lay people. And so the question here is with the atheists, like, well, which one is it that we're all deciding to? Because it's not as if, for example, the government makes it clear which one we're going for. And there's a lot of overlap in here, and sometimes people act as if they're moral relativists in certain areas of morality, but then they act as moral objectivists in others. So like even the most hardcore moral relativists, if you say to them, is it okay to kill children? They're going to say no. Like, and is it, well, what if it's, within this particular community, they think it's okay? Or are you going to change your mind here and say, no, that there's definitely something wrong with that? It's hard to find this consistency. And it's a really interesting problem, because whenever I've spoken to atheists, when I was an atheist, there isn't this kind of one rooted foundation. It's very flexible. It's very ad hoc, depending on the moment, depending on who you're talking to. There's a lot of factors in play here, and there's a lot of kind of ways of undermining each of these theories. And it like I say, it's very much a black hole. It's very the void. You end up just feeling like you're floating with no direction. And you need to confront it. You need to resolve this, because this also underpins our conception of, like, for example, universal human rights. In order to have universal human rights, we need to be able to agree universally, what human rights are exactly. And this is again linked to morality, linked to ethics, how we should be able to live with one another, what we should be free from, what we should be free to do. There's so many concepts that kind of get mingled up in this idea of morality. And in order to kind of figure something out and have it on paper, like you have with universal human rights, there needs to be a discussion of this. The underlying philosophies that
absolutely
underpin it.
You can't separate out the legal discussions about morality without the philosophical, what we would call ontological basis, right? Is it actually real, right? But then the obvious problem is, how on earth do we justify that? How do we justify the existence of objective morals without God? How do you justify the existence of right and wrong and accountability without God? We've had our first guest. The guest is Kyberia. Welcome, Kyberia, to SCDawah Live. We are discussing morality without God. What is your question?
Assalamu alaikum, brother. Are you listening to me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm from Bangladesh. I want to ask an important question, which is asked by most of Bangladeshi atheists. It is about a slavery thing. Can I ask it?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question they ask is like that. Right now, we don't have the tradition of slavery, but in the past, the era of slavery, there were some Muslims or Sahabas, they had slaves. So they ask it in that way, that did they have the power to have sex with their lady slaves or women without their consent? Is it allowed in Islam? What Islam says about it?
Right. Is that your question?
Yeah, that is.
Okay. So about slavery in Islam, I want to say two basic things. The first thing is that anything in regards to slavery or anything in regards to Sharia or anything in regards to any of these topics is something that should be dealt with very carefully with experts in those areas. So on slavery, there's a recent publication by Jonathan Brown, and you can listen, so you can read that and you can look at the whole contextualization of it. However, about a particular detail that you asked, that's again way beyond me. That's not something that I can answer. But what I will say is, whenever an atheist is using a moral argument against Islam, and they're saying Islam is evil, because, or Islam is wrong, or Islam is untrue, because Islam has particular moral philosophy which conflicts with today what liberal philosophy teaches, we could just simply ask the atheist, where did you get this idea that morality is objective? Where did you get the idea that one particular moral system is better than another? Because if you point the finger at something, then you have to have a basis. So if you say something's wrong, then that means you have the truth, that you have something that's true. And it's very important to get this right. Now, most of the time, Muslims get involved in contextualizing something. So for example, when it comes to, say, the issue of jihad and terrorism and the way people try and link this, right? Most Muslims just get entangled in this idea of, with the atheists explaining to them that, no, in Islam, we don't believe in terrorism, we don't believe in killing civilians, we don't believe in this, we don't believe in that. That's fair and well and good, but that should obviously be done with evidence and justification and using the experts. However, why do we let the atheists get away with the idea that they can point a moral finger? I mean, if they say Muslims every 2 weeks we go out in a forest and get naked and start dancing and that's immoral, fair enough, we can spend a lot of time explaining why that's not true. However, we can also spend a much we can make our time way more effective. We can simply say, wait, why is that wrong? Even if we did that, why would that be wrong? And we spend too much of our time defending or contextualizing stuff without actually pointing out that the atheists have a zero basis. They have no foundation to make any moral judgments whatsoever. And I think that's what we want to teach people in this live show, and also through our debates, talks, lectures, and trainings, that don't let the atheists get away with that. They first have to justify that before they move on. Now, the way we're doing this show is different to the past, that one guest per one question. That's the way that we've timed it out, because of last couple of times we had lots of issues with people waiting and we couldn't actually address their questions. So I'm going to go to Zach.
Before you do.
Yeah, sure.
So just to add to what you say, so there's a difference between like normative ethical claims and meta-ethical claims.
Yes.
Now, the first step is to kind of get a hold of the meta-ethical basis. Normative claims is like, oh, you know, what ought I to do here in like a practical sense when you're dealing with the world. The meta-ethical questions deal with the underlying foundation of your morality. So before we can ask all of these kind of normative claims, we're skipping a step. We need to basically get the foundation sorted. What is it that's justifying what, you know, questions like what is goodness, what is bad, what is evil, what are these things, how are we using these words, how do we define them? And then at that point you can start to talk about particular things in comparison to this paradigm. So you can say, oh well, you know, if this is what right and wrong is when we're asking this question or we're looking at this particular subject, we can then start to determine in what way this relates to these ethical principles.
That's a very good distinction, Yusuf, because a lot of the times these wires are crossed.
Yeah, and people just ask the normative questions. They'll ask a particular thing.
Yeah,
it's
a very good example of this is, I think, Richard Dawkins.
Just before that, Imran, let's just go to Zach, because I want to make sure that we have one question per person. And the last couple of times we had complaints that loads of people came and we didn't actually answer the question properly. So I'm going to go to you, Zach. Welcome to SCDawah Live. What is your question for Yusuf today?
Hey, how's it going? Is my mic working?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect, bro.
Clearly.
Wonderful. Salam, guys. It's great to be here. Real pleasure.
Salam.
Welcome.
Okay, so I'm basically an agnostic theist, just to give you a little background on where I'm coming from. And strangely enough, I'm a real oddball, and I'm also a moral nihilist. So I am agreeing with you guys essentially that there is no real basis for objective morality without a God. But my question is, how can there be one with a God? Because to me, moral statements are not particularly meaningful. And I'm not sure that even if God prefers a thing or does not prefer a thing, that we can derive good and evil from that. So that's my question.
Very good question, Zach. I'll pass that over to you, Yusuf.
So with regards to whether or not we could say like a moral statement is meaningful, we could ask in terms of what is the function of a moral statement. What's it supposed to fulfill exactly? Now, there's multiple ways of approaching morality. So you can talk about it in terms of how to keep a society cohesive, how to keep it from sort of eating itself alive, or attacking each other from within. You can talk about it in terms of how is it supposed to compete with other societies, and to what degree these societies can become successful and outlive, and so on and so forth. And then so basically there's these different levels of it. Now, with regards to whether or not a moral claim has meaning, whether with regards to what a God would give to us, I would say that we could say that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or God, is all-knowing, he's wise, and he wants to create a particular society in which they will be successful, they will be able to outcompete other places, and they will do things which he considers pleasing, i.e. so a lot of the things that are kind of outlined in the Quran is that you look after the poor, the sick, the elderly, the widow, the orphan, and that this society is one that cares for one another, one that facilitates an environment that flourishes, basically. And if he's all wise, he would be in the best position in order to be able to give these moral judgments which lead to that end goal, which lead to that flourishing, which lead to that being able to outcompete, basically. So I would say that they could be meaningful in that sense. And if it's aimed at kind of getting as many people into paradise as is possible, while still being able to make choices and to live in a world with each other and others, I would say that that's how we could see moral statements as being meaningful. You can't separate them from these purposes, from these end goals, so to speak. And if you do, then maybe moral nihilism starts to sink in a bit. But otherwise, I would say, if you're thinking of it in that context, it seems perfectly meaningful. It seems perfectly significant to have particular rules, to have particular, ways in which you're supposed to deal with your fellow human being. That would be the simple way of approaching it, I think.
Absolutely, that's a really
just quickly to add just a little bit something to that. Just quickly,
just 1 second about that. Just need to make a small announcement, and Imran, then I'll let you carry on. Please make it. Please keep in mind that loads of people are entering the studio, and we repeatedly have to ask the Muslims to leave. We have to take them out because we're trying to give the non-Muslims priority, and we're getting questions saying, I want to be on, or whatever it is. Guys, it's very important for you guys to understand. non-Muslims are the priority. They're the people who don't know about Islam. That's why we do these things. And if we have time near the end, we can bring on some Muslims, but we're going to be very strict now. And as soon as a Muslim enters the studio, we're going to be politely asking them to leave. Okay, so please just leave, because once more people enter the studios, too many people enter, then more non-Muslims can't enter. Okay, sorry, Imran.
Yeah, so just quickly on that, I think another thing can add to that, if I understood the question properly, is how does now morality escape nihilism when you introduce God into the picture? Is, well, from an Islamic perspective, at least, we believe in a being who is all wise, as Yusuf pointed out, and also a being who is the source of all goodness, for example, the creator of everything that exists, the first cause. And therefore, whatever God commands is going to be good, right? So it sort of does away with Euthyphro's dilemma from that perspective. And also, we can see how morality escapes nihilism from that perspective, because God created us, and he created us with meaning. He created us as moral beings. He created us with a nature, and this is all what Islam teaches us. This is why I think Islam is very profound from this perspective of answering these questions. And God created us, as he tells us, as upright human beings who have an intrinsic understanding of, at least the basic understanding of what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong.
Yep.
And then before we have that gauge. So I think as soon as you believe or acknowledge that there's a creator, in particular Islamic theism, it helps you escape nihilism from all perspectives, including moral nihilism.
Absolutely. Sorry to rush you there, Imran. We're just trying to make sure that we get everybody, because some guests, if we take too long, they actually leave. So I'm trying to make sure we get them. Could the admin please remove the banner so I can see the name of the people? Pitka, welcome to SCDawah. How are you doing, my friend? And what's the question?
And how are you? I was here last time for I think a few weeks ago for the Christianity debate, essentially. How many gods are there? And my question, I have a question to atheists, essentially, because atheists, they believe that God essentially is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as in the Torah and the Quran. They believe, he's very, they believe that he's, they call him a psychopathic God because of the fact that he's ordered, the deaths of tribes, or et cetera, et cetera. Now the thing is they tend to misinterpret these things. For example, like we can use an example from the Quran, the execution of the Banu Qurayza. They claim that it was a massive, even if you're not believing in the Torah, they claim that it was a massive immoral thing, when in reality, it was more necessary due to the fact that all the men in the Banu Qurayza would have been considered combatants due to the fact that the Banu Qurayza's outpost was a military outpost, which would make all the men combatants in a legal sense. And the thing is as well is that firstly, there can be no the reason why there can be no morality without God is, first you have to start, how does God exist? The Rambam, who was Moses Maimonides, he wrote in his book, Moreh Nebuchim, Guide for the Perplexed, that essentially the way that we know God exists is that it's a logical fallacy if he didn't. The thing is that everything moves. It's a law of physics that everything moves as a result of another thing causing it to move, as like an agent or a previous being causing it to move. And therefore it creates a chain reaction, essentially. It creates a chain reaction going all the way back to some kind of force. Now the thing is that this chain reaction is going, just by nature, if there was no God, it would simply be too large. It would be too large, not only just to not keep track of, but too large in order to keep proper stable order within existence. So the thing is that there must be an agent which is not bound by laws of physics, which is not bound by various limits, and therefore it must be, and therefore that is the creator, that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and God. And secondly, morality cannot exist without God due to the fact that morality has been created by him. Everything that you see around you, everything that you do is created. Thirdly, even if God did not exist, the reason why morality would still not exist without God or without some kind of religious creed is because of the fact that we can look at today, we can look at secular societies, and we can look at, which ones are much more moral. For example, in secular societies, we have higher suicide rates, we have higher drug addiction, we have more issues with just violence in general in secular societies. But we can look at religious societies like Hasidic Jewish communities, or just religious communities in general, Muslim or Jewish, all across the world, and we can see that people are generally much more happier in those communities. People are generally much more stable in those communities, and people are much more giving in those communities as well. But the thing is that these sort of secular humanist atheists like to claim that there's more immorality among us for various reasons. They say, oh yes, we're backwards, we're we're backwards, we're regressive, we're going to kill everybody if they don't convert to our religion. This is what they believe about us. Honestly, I think it's more of a psychological thing, more of this collective backlash against Muslims and Jews, essentially, just religious people in general. It's a collective backlash because people won't have the freedom to hurt themselves, essentially, and that's what's happening in secular societies. But yeah, that's my question to atheists. I mean, where do you draw your moralities from, essentially, is my question.
Absolutely, Pascal. And Imran, would you like to give some comments on what he said?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would agree with a lot of, if not most of, what our friend said, and this is the real fundamental crux of the issue, which is, we are human beings, we're moral agents. We recognize this intuitively, innately. We recognize certain things are wrong and certain things are right. We stand up for what's wrong. Atheists stand up for what they believe and feel is wrong. But the issue arises when you're having to provide an account for what you believe is wrong or what you believe is right in the absence of God, on atheism or naturalism or materialism. And this is where the fundamental issue is. And this is why we see people like, for example, Richard Dawkins, who is a perfect case study of this, someone that's recognized as one of the main, figureheads of new atheism, if not the figurehead of new atheism. Even in his book, Outgrowing God, you see when it comes to the question of morality, he basically essentially boils it down to something in the air. And what he means by something in the air, we've got a detailed video on this on epistemics where we discuss this. It was with YUSUF, where something in the air, according to him, is just depending on a particular time, whatever has been discussed, whatever has been thought about, philosophers, thinkers, dinner table discussions, etc. And people just get together and somehow decide what's right or wrong. Well, what he's appealing to here is a subjective standard of morality according to a particular environment, a time, a situation. Now, that does not give him in any way, shape, or form an objective high ground from where he can stand and fire away at religions. Essentially, what he always does, he's always attacking religions, in particular these days Islam, and saying this is bad, this is wrong, this is evil, as he does in his book Outgrowing God as well, Christianity and Islam. But according to him, his standard is a subjective standard of morality, which is ever changing. And therefore, I don't understand how he can therefore put himself in a position to attack religion where he hasn't got a claim to any objective standard. And this is exactly the problem you see atheists falling into time and time again.
Imran, we've lost you in terms of your audio. So I'm just gonna go to.
Yeah, sorry.
Your voice is very low.
Sorry.
Your voice.
Hear me now?
Yes, but it's cutting out. Keep speaking.
All right, it should be now. It should be fine now, I think.
Yeah. Now we can hear you. Yeah.
Is it back? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So essentially, what we're highlighting, I guess, today is on atheism or naturalism, you run into the problem of providing an objective account for morality. There's many theories and ideas out there, philosophical ideas in regards to how you account for morality in the absence of God. But if you scrutinize them, as YUSUF has been doing, you will come to the conclusion over and over again that at the base of it all, it's a very shoddy basis, bro. You can't really provide an objective account, any substantial account which gives you that moral high ground from where you can fire away and make moral claims from.
Absolutely. And in regards to what Pascal was saying, I think I'd like, just before I go to Joshua, I'd like some thoughts from Pascal and then move on to YUSUF. Some of the points he made, I think, were quite interesting from the ontological perspective. So Pascal, did you have any thing you wanted to say back to Imran?
No, not really. And I don't necessarily disagree. But a thing is as well is that, I mean, there's a general problem with just degenerative morality within the secular societies as well. You know, it's somewhat unrelated, but there's a degenerative morality within secular societies, and secular societies will basically pretend like, you know, atheists will basically be apologists for this, and they will pretend like nothing is happening essentially, or that it's just you know, a minor issue. But the thing is that you know, this is what's, you know, this is how they claim, you know, absolute freedom works. Absolute freedom, if we have absolute freedom, oh, you know, religion doesn't let us be absolutely free. Religion is restrictive. It's going to take away from us. It's you know, essentially being, you know, it's taking our ability to do this and that. And the thing is that, listen, absolute freedom is not the goal. That's the thing. Absolute freedom is not an ideal. You're never going to have absolute freedom. Absolute freedom is you know, complete lawlessness. And the thing is that, I mean, look at what, you know, trying to create absolute freedom has created as well. Like I said, it has created what I mentioned previously: drug addiction, looting, rioting, you know, mass murder rate, etc., etc. So, and the thing is like, once again, look at societies with more restrictions placed on by a higher power, and you can see that people are generally much more happy. People are generally stay in those societies more, actually. But then they like to pretend, oh, they stay in those societies because they'll be ostracized if they leave them. Yeah. And otherwise, Imran, I don't necessarily disagree. And yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments, Pascal. Yusuf, did you want to say anything about society?
No, it's pretty well covered, that, to be honest. I think it's probably better to move on to Joshua.
Okay.
Who's been.
So, thank you very much, Pascal. You can still remain in the studio, and we'll bring you back depending on how the flow is. So, welcome, Joshua, to SCDawah. Joshua Hayden, how are you today?
Doing good, thank you very much. I kind of hate to take it a little off topic. As far as your feelings on the problem that I've been running into is that I've been born and raised Christian. My father was a pastor, and I have been looking into Islam as, you know, making that choice to do this. And I've been reading the Quran and trying to take in as much information as possible. The problem that I run into is that the nearest mosque is 2.5, 3 hours away from where I live. And so I use YouTube as a tool, you know, to try and answer questions that I have. And what I've been running into lately is that a lot of folks in comment sections or whatever say that if you don't read the Quran in Arabic, you truly cannot be a Muslim or be a part of the Islamic faith. And you know, just things like that keep on coming up, that there's a lot of nitpicking between different groups in the Islamic faith. And it, you know, it kind of turns me off from it, because I dealt with that in the Christianity faith, and I want to move away from that. And I agree with a lot that Islam has to offer. And to see this happen, you know, it's, I just needed to answer these questions, you know, have this try to be answered, you know, because I don't have any other outlet really.
Do you mind if I jump in on that one? So I did a little video kind of talking about this. So for me, I had a similar experience. I when I was looking into Islam, to be honest, I thought the Muslims were just this one big cohesive unit. And then I took my Shahada. I started looking like deeper into the you know, the different schools of Aqidah and things like that, or theology. It's the English version of that. And these differences in certain things start to crop up more. And you do hear things like what you've heard by certain people. So with regards to the having to read the Quran in the Arabic, there are different translations, and I think you can overcome that by like looking at what these different translations say on a certain thing, and then confronting people and trying to get tafsirs, or like the going deeper into the explanation of each verses and things like that. I don't think you have to be able to speak Arabic to be a Muslim. I would say that that's quite an absurd conclusion, and I think it's probably spawned from apologetics, because when people leave Islam, a lot of the times a critique will crop up saying that, oh well, you can't leave because you don't understand the Quran because you've not learned Arabic or something like that. And I think this has kind of bled into the dawah as well, or into like trying to get people to become Muslim. So I wouldn't say that there's an absolute truth to that. You can understand what's going on in the Quran by reading the translations. It's supposed to be a religion for the world. So, the translations they're not perfect, as the Arabic gets across much more than the English translations, but the translation is the next best thing, and it is definitely a step towards that. So I wouldn't let yourself worry about that. I've got maybe 10 translations or something like that of the Quran, and I like just reading the different ways people have approached a particular verse and had a look at how they've translated it differently. In terms of a community, so you said there that you've got quite a while to go to your local mosque. If you like, I can send links to Discord servers, which is basically, there's a community of people. Discord's usually used for gamers, but it's starting to get used for a lot of different things. And we're on there, and there's two that I would, there's a few that I would recommend. I'll only mention two for the moment. One of them is called Muslim Twitter Discord server. You don't have to be on Twitter to be on there. And there's a really good community of Muslims on there. And there's another one called Turkestan. I can send you them links, and there are lots of Muslims on there. And there are places where you can ask questions. So there's different channels and different chat boxes. And I'm on there as well, with a few other brothers that I know. And so that's a really good place for people that struggle reaching out to people within a Muslim community to be able to have a conversation with Muslims and, ask them directly. And we do voice chats, which is basically like this, but without the video. And there's lots of conversations going on there. You pretty much have a section for everything. So there's a section for theology, a section for philosophy. So if you've got really weird abstract questions to do with free will versus determinism, or something specific about the Quran or a hadith, or anything like that, these are the places that you can go to and ask, as accompanied with checking out the YouTube videos. So if you like, if you leave your email address in the private chat box, I'll send you an email after this, and I can invite you to these servers. And
perfect.
God willing, you're more than welcome to join us there, and we can talk a bit more and go into the.
Right. Thank you so much, guys. Sorry to throw it off.
No.
Joshua, you can hang on. So firstly, in the private chat, if you leave your email address, we can send you some more materials. We can keep in contact. Secondly, like Yusuf said, anybody can be a Muslim. You don't need to know Arabic. There's only one Quran. There's many different, of course, translations, but they're very similar anyway. But I just wanted to say something to you about the Quran. In fact, I think Imran, maybe you can mention it about how to approach the Quran, because it's a wonderful journey that you've joined on. And Muslims, on the large body of Muslims, they agree on the big stuff. It's the smaller stuff that they disagree on. So it's not as fractured as people can sometimes nitpick on the smaller issues. But generally, if you look at 90% of the Muslim world, Orthodox Sunnis, as they're known, they pretty much agree on the vast majority of things. It's just smaller things they disagree about. So Imran, could you just say something to our friend Joshua about this?
Hi, Joshua. You're right. Hi, Joshua. Sorry, just quickly, bro. Just to give you a bit more on what Sabur said. So first and foremost, may God guide you and guide all of us. It's a very what can I say? It's an uplifting thing to see that non-Muslims are genuinely looking into Islam and inquiring about Islam. Now, one thing I'd like to say, Joshua, is first and foremost, like Sabur said, the message of Islam is very simple. The fundamental message is the same across the board. It's something that's very clear in the Quran as well, which is that there is only one God worthy of worship. There's only one creator. He's eternal. He has no beginning. He has no end. He isn't a person. He doesn't come in the form of a person. He's the creator, unlike anything we can imagine, right? Now, this, again, is a very intuitive and rational concept to understand, and it sort of appeals to the heart of the human being. Secondly, God clarifies one of the main objectives of the Quran. The entire message of the Quran revolves around a central theme, and that theme is that God created us to know him and to worship him. Our creator loves us and he created us to worship him. Worship in Islam, Joshua, is not just praying 5 times a day or fasting in Ramadan. Worship is your entire life. Everything you do can be a form of worship if you do it conscious of your creator, right? Essentially, that's what we're doing. We're living, we're conscious human beings, and God created us to recognize him, to turn to him, to have a relationship with him. That's the central message of Islam. So Islam basically means submission to the will of God, right? A Muslim, someone that's a Muslim, the word itself means somebody who submits to God and worships him alone. So essentially, that's why we say, for example, Jesus, Moses, Abraham, Noah, all of the prophets of God, which we also acknowledge in Islam, were Muslim by meaning because they submitted themselves to God. And that, again, it bridges those gaps, especially if you come from a Christian background. You can recognize these figures and you can recognize that they actually were people who submitted to God himself. When it comes to Jesus, peace be upon him, we believe Jesus was a mighty messenger sent by God, similar to Moses and Noah and Abraham, but we at the same time, we clarify that he wasn't God and he wasn't the Son of God. He was a messenger, a prophet sent by God to the children of Israel to guide them back to the worship of God. Essentially, the same thing that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came to do, which is to guide humanity back to God. And the Quran is the final revelation of God. So like Yusuf said, like Sabur said, you don't need to worry about studying Arabic or knowing Arabic. There's some brilliant translations available today. Just pick up a good translation, read it, and that should suffice. Because the meaning is what, essentially, at the end of the day, the meaning is the most fundamental thing we need to grasp of Islam and the Quran, right? So one thing I would recommend you do, Joshua, when you read the Quran, start with the first chapter, which is called the opening in Arabic. It's a very beautiful prayer. Study that, read that. A good resource if you want to study the Quran in detail in English is someone called Numan Ali Khan. Maybe we can put that in the comments. Is a guy called Numan Ali Khan. He's on YouTube and he has loads of videos explaining the Quran in simple English. Very good resource. And I'm sure between the Quran,
the Quran that I received was I believe from Gain Peace Project. Is that one that you recommend?
In Chicago, yeah.
Okay, awesome, perfect,
brilliant.
Yeah,
all right.
And make loads of supplication, Joshua.
Yeah, make sure you leave your email address, please, Joshua, in the private chat. Can you see the messages on there?
Yes.
Yeah, so make sure you leave your email, because then we will be in contact with you through email like we have done with other people. And within the next hour, you'll get an email from all of us.
All right. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.
God bless you, man.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Adam, welcome to SCDawah Live. And by the way, thank you very much, Joshua, for joining us. It's always nice to have someone switch on their webcam as well so we can see them. So welcome, Adam, to SCDawah Live. Where are you calling from and what is your question today?
Hello.
Adam, I think needs to be unmuted by the admin. Okay, we'll skip Adam and go to Delisted. Welcome to SCDawah today. Delisted, where are you calling from and what is your question?
Yes, hello. I am calling from Malaysia.
Malaysia.
My question is, sometimes atheists use science as a basis for forwarding their moral values, like using the childhood marriage argument, what science says about child marriage, and they use that as a basis for forwarding their argument that it is harmful for the child to marry at that age.
Hello?
So how do we deal with that if they use science as an argument?
Yeah, Adam, what we're going to do is Delisted is a Muslim. We didn't recognize that when we continued in the studio. Like I said before, we're prioritizing non-Muslims today. So I'm going to go with Adam first, and then if we have time, we will go back to Delisted. Adam, welcome to SCDawah Live. What is your question today?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Yeah, basically, I had a question. Basically, I was watching one of Adnan Rashid's videos, and in the video, he was talking about how God can't cease to exist and exist at the same time, or God can't make a rock as that heavy that he can't carry, because that's like a paradox question. But then I was watching a Muhammad Hijab video, and basically he was saying how God uses free will that he gives to us and his own predestination, but we can't understand the mechanisms of that. So how comes that paradox can't happen, but this one can?
Okay.
Repeat the question, sorry.
So just a second about that, Adam. We today need to stick to the topic of morality and God.
Right.
And this is sort of not going to be part of that. And by the way, are you Muslim?
Me, yeah, Muslim.
Yeah. So the guests today, we are only asking non-Muslims to join.
All right.
And please, for anybody watching online, we don't want anyone to be offended, but the very reason we set up these lives is for the sake of communicating with non-Muslims. Because at the end of the day, Muslims, they know the Quran, they know the Sunnah, they know where they can go learn about Islam. It's the non-Muslims who we are reaching out to and putting our efforts into. So could I ask the admin to remove delisted and Adam and to bring in more people? And while we are at it, let's just go back to Pisca. So Pisca, within the Jewish tradition, there is a strong philosophical tradition, from what I know, when it comes to arguing for God's existence. And what can you tell us about Jewish philosophers or Jewish theologians when it comes to the idea of morality, what they've said about it, and whether they think it's possible to have morality without God?
Well, Rambam, to my memory, the two people, well, there's actually been three. So there's been three people essentially who have been very pervasive in, polemics for proof of the existence of the one eternal God that was revealed to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and, arguments essentially, against, the Trinity and against, disbelieving doctrines. And these people were Yehuda Halevi, who wrote the Kuzari, these people, and then Nachmanides, and then Maimonides, two different people, by the way. Maimonides essentially wrote that due to the fact that everything is created by God, therefore there can be no morality without him. Secondly, God is he is all benevolent, so therefore he controls that which is moral, and that which we do as moral is done to please a higher power. Even actually atheists, even them, just out of nature as a human being, regardless of what your belief is, we believe essentially that all good deeds that you do is essentially like you have a concept of the nafs, right, in Islam.
Yes.
Yeah. So essentially, how the nafs can reproduce things that as like habits. The thing is that we essentially believe that it's it's a chelik nefesh, which means it's a part of the soul. That even good deeds that you do, even if regardless of your belief, are being done to please the higher power, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala / God, and Avinu Shabbat. And yeah. For when it comes to the idea that is whether or not the Abrahamic God is immoral because of many things in the Tanakh, the more contemporary scholars up to the 1980s or so have been writing about this due to the fact that back in the day these things were not necessarily seen as an issue, because but very much prior to the Enlightenment, people tended to essentially they tended to know why why these things were moral, why these things weren't moral.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Pisca. And if you can stay around, because we have Sergeant Rocket, and maybe you can also help us in communicating morality without God to him. Yes. So, Sergeant Rocket, welcome to SCDawah Live. Where are you calling in from, and what is your question?
Assalamu alaikum. So I'm from Pakistan.
Sergeant Rocket, we are only allowing non-Muslims on.
Yeah, but the question I have is kind of from a non-Muslim perspective, so I think it's a helpful question.
Okay, fine. But from now on, and the thing is, if we have a name like Skyrocket, we can't really tell if the person's a Muslim or a non-Muslim. But it's very important that the rules that we've been repeating all throughout the show and all the previous shows, from now on, any Muslim who joins, we are going to ask you to go to the back, because we've had non-Muslims come into the studio and leave because we've had many people accept. So Sergeant Rocket, what is your question?
So my question is, how do you prove revelation with a rational basis? Like, for example, I actually agree with the contingency argument and the cosmological kalam argument. They're good arguments, but how do you prove revelation after going through that?
Can I answer this question?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the thing is, for example, Musa alayhi salam, such a Moshe Rabbeinu, the way there is not, even just outside of rationality, even outside of philosophy, there is empirical evidence to suggest that, his revelation was true. And the way that we know this is through, essentially, chain of transmission, isnad. And not only do we have chain of transmission to prove this, the thing is as well is that we have chains of transmission, and the people who are included in chains of transmission when it comes to bearing witness to, or being, we have textual witnesses listed, bearing witness to, or transmitting revelation. We basically have proof that these people have lived. There's many people. We have all the names. We have many names of hundreds of thousands of Jews that were at Har Sinai. Moshe Rabbeinu, Musa alayhi salam. It says in Sefer Bamidbar in the book of Numbers that he wrote down and listed every name of every man from each tribe, and they gave their witnesses. Men could only give testimonies at Mount Sinai, and there are many different settlements with these people's graves, with these people's names, and essentially, even just empirical evidence proving that they testified to the events that happened on Mount Sinai. The thing is as well is that basically, it's like I said, just through chains of transmission with textual witnesses and empirical proof that they lived as well as alone, a large deal of proof for revelation. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Pascal, for that. Also, Skyrocket, we have a great publication called The Eternal Challenge, which you can download for free. And additional to that, you can also download the Forbidden Prophecies. And we also have the SCDawah training course on the YouTube channel, in which we go over the reasons for revelation, the proof of revelation, and the proof of prophethood. And you can go through all of that video series when it comes to why it is that we actually believe in the Quran being the word of God. So
on the IRA channel?
Yes, you could go to the IRA channel and you could watch
IRA.org website as well. The website as well. It's got
You've got a training on that, don't you, Imran? You've got a training on GoRap.
Yes. GoRap training, the one you and me did as well, that's there as well, inshallah. But just one quick point I want to add to when it comes to the preservation of the Quran and how we know, or not the preservation of the Quran, but how we know the Quran is from God. Now, there's many approaches we can take. There are several miracles that are listed in the books that you've mentioned, bro, which are very important for people to study. But one of the things I always recommend people to do, and I think that's something that's really undermined, is for people to study the message of the Quran, which is accessible today for everyone. And one thing you'd realize is that, and if you sincerely and objectively look at this reality, the Quran's revealed over a period of 23 years, right? It's revealed over an expanse of time, and that's an entire lifetime for many people, right? 20 plus years is, most of us that are watching this live right now are probably not even 20 years old. Yeah, it's very possible. Now, the Quran's coming down over this period of time in bits and pieces, addressing certain situations that are unfolding at that time. And yet, when we read it as a whole today, what we see, it's completely coherent from beginning to end. The concepts, the ideas, they're completely coherent. And that's something very unique. And not only are they coherent, but the ideas that the Quran presents, in particular, ideas related to who God is and the concept of God, the most fundamental things. The concept of God is not only coherent, it's in line with human nature. It makes sense, right? It just makes sense in every perspective. So that's a very powerful thing to look at, inshallah.
Absolutely.
All right,
absolutely.
thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Sergeant Rocket, for joining us. Okay, so I want to touch upon this topic because obviously, YUSUF, we've done some talks on this as well, and morality without religion, or this whole idea that, look, if you don't believe in God, then you essentially have to be a moral nihilist. Now, I want to ask you, what is moral nihilism, and why is it that there is a strong sense in which an atheist has to be a moral nihilist? It's sort of similar to the debate I had with Cosmic Skeptic on this, but I wanted your thoughts as well on this.
Well, there is, to a certain degree, ways that they can say it. Again, it's just that it becomes an issue in terms of how you're rooting it exactly, and it ends up boiling down to the will to power. Who can basically win, and everyone's gone. I'm on my own. So Assalamu alaikum. So basically, with regards to atheism, if the world ends up in this kind of heat death in the end, and that everything is ultimately pointless and insignificant, then moral claims are pointless and insignificant as well. They're just the peculiarities of finite beings making arbitrary decisions based on their own desires and whims, be that singularly or collectively. And if everything is this arbitrary, you can't root it in anything other than the will to power. But the will to power itself, intuitively, even for the atheist, I think, comes across as quite an abhorrent thought, because you end up like with issues as well. If morality is rooted in the will to power, then how is it that we can say if all the Germans get together in during the World War II and they say that this is right? How do you argue against that? If they've collectively gathered enough power to enact that within the particular locality, it becomes weird. It becomes like, well, to what degree do we argue that this is wrong? And is it just an extension of our own power that we win the war and then we say, oh well, we're the ones that have decided this is wrong now, therefore it becomes wrong. And again, nihilism can leak into these ideas of moral relativism or moral subjectivism, but ultimately, like, nihilism would kind of sit above them all and say, well, these are just arbitrary, random decisions. There's no major significance to any of them. It can be that one, it can be this one, it can be any of them. Why pick one over the other? How do you make this hierarchy or this value judgment based on these different systems? This, without any sort of transcendental guidance or any transcendental being that dictates this for us, it just becomes really arbitrary, really weird, and hard to get your head around exactly.
Absolutely. And something I was thinking about was, there's obviously an ontological argument to be made. Actually, before I continue, just give me a second. Imran, could you carry on for a second, because I need to talk to the admin.
Yeah, what was the question? Sorry.
All right.
You lost me.
Moral nihilism. Why does atheism lead to moral nihilism?
Okay, so the way I see it is, as soon as you claim atheism, as soon as you say that there is no, that is, if you, by atheism, you define it as there is no creator, there is no God. Now we have to continue the sentence, or the statement, because it doesn't stop there. As soon as you say that, there is an implication, and the implication is there is no God, there is no creator, therefore everything is a result of blind, random, cold processes. Essentially, everything is one big accident, including us, right? It's just one big accidental soup which has been animated and is actualizing in front of us. That's all it is. Now, if everything is an accident, and there's no creator behind it, there is no cause behind it, there's nothing that's directing it, or there's nothing that has an objective behind it, it's just random. If that's the case, then I don't see how we can sit here today as human beings and even sit and talk about things such as morality, which we consider to be an actual thing that's there, that we live by, or we postulate and we suggest and we act according to. I don't see how we can provide how we can even make sense of what morality is from that perspective. It just doesn't make any sense. And therefore, to say something is good or bad, right or wrong, is to assume a position, is to assume that there is such a thing, that morality is true. There are truly things that are good, truly things that are bad, and therefore we can sit here and make those claims. But on atheism, what does that even mean? It's just one big accident. And therefore, what does it mean? What does good mean? What does bad mean? What is what shape do these things take in reality? It's a bottomless hole, literally. Right?
Absolutely. And Imran, I just wanted to say we've had a special guest join us, mashallah.
Mashallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Mashallah.
Wa alaikum salam.
Just wanted to say salam to you
today.
Just wanted to say salam to you. It's an excellent panel. Alhamdulillah, I'm learning a lot. I think as laypersons like myself, when it comes to issues like this, there's so much to understand. And if you notice, probably you haven't noticed, the way you're explaining this, alhamdulillah, it's actually becoming very clear
to someone like, I would say I'm not specialized in the subject. So this is quite interesting when we touch on this subject where you're using languages, not complicating it, because often people find that the discussion is buried under deep jargon. And this is what we should avoid. And I think this is the point I want to just join in to say, avoid the jargons, technical terms, and just use layman's language, and then you see people how they come in and tune in on the subject.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you this question, Mansoor. Of course, in the park, you've been dealing with atheists since pretty much the 90s. So how would you explain to an atheist that without God, the sense of morals is under question? How would you explain that to them?
I mean, there's various ways of tackling this. I mean, my approach is something like very basic. Depending on how the person's outlook is, you have to gear the answer from that angle. I mean, I often find that going through standard responses from, all this philosophy of religion or morality and ethics, and it often leaves people often confused within the terminology that are used. So if an atheist doesn't believe in God, of course, they still have to live their life accordingly, right? They still have to live life in a way they think is fulfilling. They think it's meaningful and reasonable and not hurting others. So I often find the yardstick they follow is like this. As long as it doesn't, if I'm not hurting anyone, if no one's hurting anyone, you're okay to live your life accordingly, if it doesn't involve harm to anyone. So it seems to be they're somehow rationalizing their morality based on the idea of harm. So if it doesn't harm you, then it's okay. So the questions often comes with this, like, are you suggesting that if deformed babies are not produced when you have incestual relationships, for example, it's okay because you're going to take contraceptive measures? They have to admit that, there is nothing wrong with this because there is no harm that is going to result. So often they have to take this, even though that's not palatable even to them. Okay, I mean, you can see from their own reaction on their faces that it's not something they would agree themselves personally. But this is what happens. So when people don't believe in God, they have to make a way of justifying their interactions with the people around them and themselves as well. How do they live their life accordingly? So when we talk about morality, what does morality entail in fact? I mean, I'm sure you've explained this in very technical terms. What is all about morality? Is morality something to do with in terms of our outlook, in terms of our good and bad, or right or wrong? Or is it to do with everything that I do, is this appropriate? Is this something that is acceptable? Because morality, with this relative sense, correct me if I'm wrong, people can choose a set of morality subjectively and say, that's how I live my life. So if you want to do this, go ahead, because I don't see there's a problem with that. So from that angle, I would approach normally, and this is, I find that people connect this in this way. This is just how I have been dealing with it.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very good answer and a quite concise answer at that. And of course, you've tried and tested it, and it's something which works, and people can see your videos to actually see that. I wanted to give the question of NJR to you, because he's been waiting a while and he had actually a question about this. Welcome to SCDawah, NJR. How are you? Where are you calling from? And what is your question?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm from Canada. So my question is, and it's kind of a bit of a flawed question, but it's not something I understand completely, which is like, how do we rationally know that God's nature is intrinsically good? Because like God in the Quran, for example, he says, كَتَبَ رَبُّكُمْ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ, he's written mercy for himself. Or in a hadith Qudsi, it says that he's forbidden like injustice on himself. How do we know that like we can't be deceived, for example, regarding the truth? Something may appear true to us, but that's not actually the case. So how do we know his nature is intrinsically good?
Yeah, that's a very similar question. Thank you, NJR, to sort of questions that Christian missionaries raise about Allah. So Mansoor, would you like to give an answer to that?
Okay, very briefly then. I mean, when we talk about the character of God. Obviously, there are many things that you cannot speculate and get an answer just by speculation. There are things that you can use your intellect and reason, and you arrive at the answer that the creator has to be one. The creator has to have energy or power. The creator has to have a will or consciousness or awareness. But things about, is the creator intrinsically good or bad? I mean, how do you just get this from speculations? Because you can believe in gods where there's a god of good and there's a god of evil, and they made some compromise. There's various ways of people coming up with these ideas. In Islam, of course, we don't just rely in terms of getting the understanding of God through our intellectual reasoning. So we have this aql, the intellect, as well as the naql, the text itself, which is the divine revelation. So the creator tells us, the finite human beings, there's a limit to how much we can speculate, and then tells us and promises us in terms of what his character is. So the Quran is actually an explanation of who the creator is and what his characteristics are. And the brother just mentioned about two of the things that Allah mentioned, that how he has forbidden from himself injustice, and he's prescribed on himself mercy when he didn't even have to be merciful, because merciful is being lenient to someone, isn't it? But on another angle, you can say, like, yes, merciful is a form of justice. So Allah has described himself, and he described himself as someone who's called Al-Haq. One of his name is the truth. So getting a philosophical justification of what God's character is something that you can debate. I mean, you are the experts. But when I look at it, I mean, what are the ways that we can actually ascertain about Allah? Because we see this reflected within ourselves. If Allah wasn't truthful, then none of these are meaningful. I mean, you can just believe in anything. You can just believe and disbelieve. There's so many things that you can do. The Quran comes and it tells you that be honest and truthful. I mean, I find that strange that Allah tells us to be truthful, to be just, to be honest, to deal justly, and he himself is devoid of these characteristics. He himself, someone is like not us himself being truthful and so on. So, I mean, I leave that for you, for the expert panels to give a philosophical understanding on that, inshallah.
MashaAllah. Sabur, can I quickly add to that, to what Brother Mansoor said is phenomenal, especially his last point, MashaAllah, was brilliant. That Allah wouldn't tell you to do something and then be less than what he's telling you to do. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think another way we could look at it is that it's a very intuitive thing as well, bro. Like, if we're going to, if you apply, I would even refer to it as unreasonable skepticism. If you were to apply that to your own selves, I mean, you can end up denying everything. You can end up questioning everything. Okay, do I really exist? Or is the world around? Does the world around me really exist? You wouldn't go to that level. Some things you assume intuitively that these things exist, and that's it. We start from there. Now, if you're going to have a good assumption about any being or anything, then it has to be God first and foremost, because he's the highest being. He's the most perfect being, right? So we have to assume the best about God over anything and everything else. So therefore, it just naturally, intuitively makes sense that a being, God himself, who's telling his creatures to be good and to be just and to be upright and to avoid Satan and to avoid the traps of Satan and to live good lives so they'll be rewarded and to avoid bad things so they don't be punished, you would intuitively and naturally accept such a being who is claiming to be the creator of the heavens and the earth, the source of everything, to be the all-knowing, all good being, the being who is, the source of all goodness. So it's a very intuitive thing as well. I mean, and to question that, it's just there's something not right in the way we're thinking about these things. We're overthinking these things to a point where it's just not useful. It's just unnecessary.
There's another way of looking at it as well, in terms of evil being like a lack or a, like, so for example, impatience. Impatience is the awareness of the fact that you've only got a certain amount of time in your life. And this awareness of the end is something that makes you want to rush things. Would impatience make sense for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He's eternal. Would that kind of thing manifest in him? Other ways of looking at evil would be the desire for something you don't have. Everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the source of all power, the creator of all things. There is no way of taking anything away from him. Anything that is brought into existence belongs to him. and it's being in existence or being removed away doesn't take it from him. It's, you know, so there's no what desire would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have for evil or for you know, these things which could be considered like a lack, and a desire for that which you lack. There's another way of approaching it without going into too much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those answers, guys. I'm going to go to Ali A. Welcome.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'll be interested to hear what Pisco has to say from Jewish perspective, if you don't mind.
Regarding specifically what?
On the issues of the intrinsic nature of God being good and not someone who's lying. So God, good and truthful, for example.
Well, I mean, like we said, we believe it's very similar to the Islamic perspective. Like we said, this is actually written by Rabbi Akiva in Maseches Sanhedrin. Basically, about, I can't remember which specific passage right now, but basically he said in the Hakadosh Baruch Hu chesronos, meaning there are no essentially negatives to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, which is God, and essentially, you know, like you said, you know, for example, God does not demand us to make sacrifices, and he wouldn't, you know, he demands us to make sacrifices when there's a Beis Hamikdash, when there's a temple. So, but he wouldn't demand him, you know, of himself, because once again, remember that God is not the same, you know, he is not the same as a human being. We are his creation, and he is far above us. So therefore, he would not demand anything that you know, that he would be below, because you know, God is intrinsically perfect, and if he was intrinsically perfect, therefore he's unable to demand anything that's morally wrong, especially when it's hypocrisy. God cannot be a hypocrite, essentially, because his knowledge is eternal. And yeah, that's basically the Jewish perspective. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I think taking from there, this point of perfection is something that we need to emphasize. If our whole universe and everything, every part of that we can see as a creation is dependent on a creator, and the creator has to be, by definition, perfect, has to be absolute, have to be independent of any imperfections, has to be free from imperfections. And lying or being not good or being bad or worse, these are things which are weaknesses and imperfections. So, you know, if the creator has to be absolute, then by absolute, we talk about absoluteness in terms of the perfection of the attributes, which is goodness and truthfulness and so on.
Was that back to Pisca, or was that just a point you were making?
That's the point to add, basically, because when we say, you know, how can God, how do we even ascertain God being intrinsically good? And because it's linked with God's being perfect in his attributes. Has to be a being that doesn't begin to exist, a being that is not someone brought into existence. By definition, is not limited within the attributes, is not limited by anything externally. So this inherent characteristics will be one of absolute perfection. So there will be no limitations or weaknesses, and that means this being would not be imperfect to lie or cheat or you know, or to be bad, rather than being good and truthful. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So let's go now to Ali A. Welcome, Ali, to SCDawah Live. Where are you calling from, and what is your question?
I'm from. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
I'm from the United States, and my question is: do you guys think that focusing on the topic of morality is more valuable than talking about like God's existence? For example, like Pascal's wager. Like, what level of importance do you find morality to be over like proving God's existence?
Very good question. Who wants to answer that?
No, you.
Just to, I think one of the ways I'll answer it, I think the question of morality itself is a very powerful way. You know, it's an argument for God's existence, or it can be an argument for God's existence, because when we talk about morality, we're talking about an intrinsic human reality that we can't run away from. Every single human being lives and acts in a or tries to act in a moral way. We are manifesting morality each time we take an action or do something or say something. It's a moral. It's moral by its very foundations. Whether good or bad is a different thing, but we are manifesting this as we live. So morality is a very intrinsic, natural thing to every single human being. Now the question is, the things as human beings, we know there are certain things that are wrong, there are certain things that are right. right? And we recognize this intuitively. We don't have to rationalize, for example, that killing an innocent child is wrong. Every single sane person would stand up and say, yeah, it's wrong, right? So if that's the case, then the question is, well, how do we make sense of this morality? How do we ground it? How do we account for it in the absence of God? And if you can't account for it, and we know it exists, we know it's true, that in itself is a very powerful argument, or at the very least, a sign that points back towards God. So it's almost killing two birds with one stone, like the saying goes, right? So not only is it something that needs to be accounted for, because as human beings we live by it and we interact with each other through it, but at the same time, it acts also as a very powerful point or a sign or an argument that points towards a creator, a God. You know, the very fact that we recognize things to be right and wrong, the very fact that we understand that there are concepts such as good and bad, right and wrong. So I think it acts as a powerful argument in and of itself.
Can I add on to that, Imran?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So another thing as well is the very fact that human morality exists, the very fact that human consciousness exists. It exists in a way that is extremely unique from other animals, to the point where other animals essentially can't achieve it. They could not evolve or elevate themselves to the level of human consciousness and human morality that we as, humans, have. And the thing is that this is evidence for, God, essentially. It's evidence for God. It's evidence for a higher power creating us with morality. Now there are things among certain animals, behavioral and emotional aspects that, I give them not necessarily a sense of right and wrong, but basically give them an instinct of what to do and what not to do in certain situations. But once again, that is extremely limited. It is unique from, it is unique from, human consciousness and human morality. The thing is that, but however, if you look at humans, for example, just, like we put like a monkey in front of a banana, you'll say to the monkey, or I've tried to communicate to the monkey, this banana, was worked very hard for, by X, by somebody, if it's their property, you shouldn't take it. The monkey would still take it. They don't have a concept of this. And they could never elevate themselves to, that sort of concept due to the fact that it's just their nature. But if you do that, in front of like just a basic human being, say, it's a normal person, not starving or anything, you say, yeah, this person worked very hard for, this banana, would you take? And they, normally they'd say no. And even if they did, they'd still know that it's wrong, and just, they would dismiss it. However, the very fact that we even have this sort of, complex concept of morality is honestly proof of the fact that there is a higher power, as there's no other species on the planet, no other species on the planet, no other, not insects, no animal, that have, this sort of complex, idea of moral good, moral evil, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why I believe it is more important to discuss morality than the idea of Pascal's wager, because Pascal's wager is is the idea that people wage their lives based on whether or not God is real. And if anything, one should look inside themselves, and one should look around, basically they should look around nature, and they should look around, the universe itself, if they wish to see, proof of God. You can find God as He has left evidences in various things among us.
I would say it's not so much that one should be favored over the other. I think they complement each other, and they, you look into this and it adds a step in the right direction. You look into that, it adds a step in the right direction. So Pascal's wager is, one of the steps. And then, looking into the arguments surrounding the issues of morality, these are other steps. So yeah, that's pretty much all I'd add to it. I think they're all quite important in their own way. And, if someone's 2 steps away, both of these arguments can help take them there.
Absolutely.
Then they would be both important.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. We're just running out of time now, so I'm going to be asking everyone to give their final sort of thoughts. Although we have got another guest, let's maybe just give that guest one question, and hopefully we can try and answer and wrap up the show at 7.
Inshallah.
Welcome, Dhanush, to SCDawah Live. What is your question today?
Yeah, my question is, how do you know that God is always God's moral is always correct? Because he's the one who makes someone like homosexual or transgender, and then he tells us it's not good to behave in such a way, such acts, but he made us in that way. So why is it wrong? And how can we say that God is always right? Because he's just playing with us, like He's just playing with the people. He makes in certain way, and then he tells you can't do that. So why is it justifiable? And how can he be just?
So about this question, this is essentially a meta-ethical question which earlier was addressed by Mansour and also I think Yusuf. So, okay, the question is essentially, is God good? Why does God take certain actions? And the simple answer to that, the way that we try and explain it, is through revelation. So here is the evidence that the revelation is true. And
Your
if
microphone sounds covered, like it's like you've covered your
my
microphone.
mic?
Sounds muffled, like you've
Okay.
got something covering it.
Can you carry on while I just?
It's fine now.
Is it fine now?
Yeah.
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello.
Go on.
Okay.
Conspur.
So, what was the last thing I said before?
Sorry, my net is not well.
You talked about revelation.
Okay, so revelation. We know through revelation that whatever is true in that revelation, that if we have evidence that the Quran is the word of Allah, if we have evidence that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the true messenger of Allah, then if Allah says something, then it's true. Because it's a logical deduction. If we know that something is true, then what comes from God, who is the truth, is truth. Now, when someone tries to ask the question, well, how do you know God is good? How do you know God's not playing a game? How do you know God is not a great deceiver? How do you know God is not evil? Well, if revelation, we've been led to revelation by our akal, by truth, by following our rationality, then to deny the teachings of that revelation is tantamount to denying your own akal, to denying your own reasoning. In fact, what's very interesting about this is one of the earliest scholars of Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he gives the example, this exact example, and he gives the example that if you recognize the truthfulness of Islam and you come to the truthfulness of Islam through a journey of discovering God and discovering why the Prophet, peace be upon him, is the Prophet, and you use your mind to come to the truth that Islam is truth amongst all the other religions, then when Islam tells you to take an action or tells you something which you do not have direct evidence for, but you have direct evidence for Islam, then for you to deny that would be tantamount to denying the thing that led you to that, which is your reason. So Ibn Taymiyyah argued essentially that if you deny revelation after discovering the truthfulness of revelation, you might as well deny your akal. You might as well deny your ability to reason. So we've run out of time. I'd like to thank everybody. Mansour, thank you for joining us. Imran, Yusuf, Piska, and all the other guests who joined us on SCDawah. I'm very sorry we couldn't have Hamza Sotsis join the live stream. The problem was basically something came up and he couldn't actually turn up. But next week, Wednesday at 5:30, inshallah, we are sure to have him and others, inshallah. We're going to be discussing another topic related to atheism, and we're trying to make this consistent every Wednesday, 5:30 to 7 o'clock British Standard Time. Just to end, Mansour and others, I'd like your thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to quickly make a point on this, on the question by Danush. I mean, it's essentially asking like this: once you establish your standard, say you're measuring what is 1 kilogram or what is 1 meter, and then you're actually then questioning, why is this 1 kilogram? Why is this 1 meter? You're actually questioning the standard itself, because we are saying the perfection is being good and truthful and true. And now you're saying, why is good good? Why is true true? And so on. We're actually questioning the standard itself. Once you know the explanation of the ultimate explanation, you don't then question that, do we? Because if we were to then question, why so, you just carry on like this, and then nothing becomes meaningful. So once we know, for example, a standard is this, that's how you go by. That's how you measure everything against. You measure your weakness, you measure your whatever it is against the standard. And if you think about it, the Quran or the revelations from others, other religions, for example, the monotheistic religions, they describe God as being good and God in being true. But we are now questioning. That's not true. So basically what we are saying is God is playing some kind of game, or he's actually being, the doing some kind of tricks or what's the word? The word that is called in terms of someone who deceives, right? Deception. Now, isn't deception a weakness? Isn't deception an imperfection? So it goes back to the same circular argument again. I mean, we are asking that we want God to be ultimately absolute, because that's how it should be. Everything should depend on an absolute being. And then we are saying, no, the absolute being has to be somehow limited with imperfections. I don't see how this works. Just wanted to point this out.
Absolutely. And Pascal, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to give any last thoughts?
No, not necessarily, but I thank you for having me on here. And yeah, it's been a very good stream. It's a very good discussion. Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, and please join us next week, Pascal. We'd love to have you and to have your thoughts. Of course, atheists are a common sort of adversary intellectually when it comes to Muslims and Jews. So we'd definitely love to hear from you. Imran and Yusuf, would you like to give your concluding thoughts?
You go first, Imran.
Yes, okay, cool. Just quickly, I think, yeah, the question of morality is a very important question that needs to be addressed. Sometimes what happens is we, I think, let atheists run away with the position of being judge without actually asking them for the credentials. And this is a very big important problem, because a lot of the times they'll point fingers towards religion and say this is bad, this is wrong, this is evil, but when in actual fact they don't have any high moral objective ground to stand upon from where they're firing away. So it's just sometimes a case of pointing this out to them and highlighting to them how the atheism they're adopting, it in and of itself is flawed and doesn't allow them that position to attack other things and say this is good or this is bad. That's one thing. The other thing quickly I wanted to say is, this idea about God playing games or, having fun with us and whatever the case is. I think something that Mansoor and the brothers have established is God is the most perfect being. Therefore, that straight away logically necessitates that God can't be anything, can't be evil or bad or play games with you or be deceptive, etc. Now, if God is therefore perfect, therefore, whatever happens to us in our life, say we have certain feelings or certain certain inclinations, and then we are told not to fulfill certain inclinations, we have to understand this within the context of who God is now. We have to therefore understand, and Islam clarifies this, that this life is a test. So you will be tested in many different ways. One way you're going to be tested is you may have inclinations and you may have to resist. You may have to leave things, sacrifice things for the sake of God, right? And that's a part of your specific test. So this life is a test, because sometimes the perspective atheists come from is, well, we live once, YOLO, you're supposed to have fun, it's supposed to be perfect, right? It's supposed to be all good, it's supposed to be just amazing, and therefore why would God do X, Y, and Z? Well, if you take the whole discussion, if you're talking to a Muslim, take the whole picture into context. God exists and this life is a test. From that perspective, yes, it makes sense. God will test us by different means and things. Therefore, God is not playing games with us, this is a part of our test. And it's an opportunity for us to attain the pleasure of God and get closer to Him.
Absolutely. Yusuf?
Yeah, just one quick question to Pascal. Are you on any of the Discord servers by any chance?
Here, yes, I am. Hold on. Can I DM you after this?
Yeah, of course. You might. Which one are you on? Sorry to.
I'm on Muslim Twitter and the House of Wisdom.
Okay, if you just tag me on the thingy, because I'd like to talk to you a bit more.
No, of course.
You're a really interesting guy. But yeah, so just in regards to concluding this, so when people are talking to atheists, the thing you've got to remember is just this distinction between normative ethics and meta ethics. People are constantly going to throw particular claims at you. Well, justify this, justify that, and you can get into those conversations, and they can be very interesting. But it's, again, just to reiterate what I said at the beginning, a lot of this is pointless if you've not established how it is you're going to determine what good is in the first place. And that is itself like a pickle of a conversation to get into, especially for the atheists. Like, how is it that we're justifying this in this kind of unguided survival of the fittest process, where it's, again, just the will to power ends up being the underlying principle that rules what good and evil is. There was a gentleman that asked the question in the chat. Unfortunately, we've not got enough time to get him on here. He was just saying, well, why can't it just be the law that we consider good and evil? I mean, because if it's just whatever the law is, that's whatever the government are setting it as. And this is going to vary and change depending on where you are in the world, who's in government, what the particular fancies of the particular people are at a particular time. And it ultimately just makes good and evil absolutely arbitrary. There is no norms. And if a society ends up moving towards what we would today consider abhorrent, there is no absolute way of kind of justifying a definite critique of that without falling into these weird kind of hypocritical stances where you have to admit that there is a sort of arbitrariness to moral claims, but then to admit that and then stand firmly behind a particular moral claim just seems rather absurd if you're aware of how that is how morality operates. It's maybe an excuse for those who haven't kind of hit that meta level of morality. People that have just kind of, say 500, 600 years ago, they're in the middle of nowhere, and they're not asking these kind of questions. Ignorance is bliss in this sense, and they can fall back on that ignorance. But if you're aware of these meta-ethical issues, that excuse dissolves. You don't. That's not available to you anymore.
Yep.
And these are the most important questions to confront and to overcome before you can move on to saying, well, this is evil and that's evil.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Yusuf. Mansoor?
I just wanted to ask, actually find out your view on this, the question that is asked. When we talk about people lying, for example, right? We know scientifically lying is a conscious process where we have to really, in our prefrontal cortex, go against this. So speaking the truth, it seems to be what's called hardwired in ourselves, in our biological makeup. And to lie is like you have to, switch something else. You just have to actively do that process, going against the normative things within the biological processes. If we are already built in, hardwired to speak the truth, what does it tell you? What does it tell you?
This is a very interesting question, and I think next week we can talk about something related to this in much more detail, because every week we try and cover a particular topic about atheism, but you're absolutely spot on. There's a hard wiring within us that we value not only truth, but we also value many other things, which from an evolutionary point of view are detrimental to us. So what's going on? I mean, why would natural selection set us up for failure? Because a truthful person, the nice guy finishes last, right? So it's a very important question, and this is linked to another meta issue, which is truth valuable intrinsically or instrumentally? And from an atheistic perspective, the best argument you can come up with is truth is valuable instrumentally. It says valuable as it helps you survive and reproduce or do things linked to that, but not in of itself. However, human beings, we all value truth way beyond its instrumental value. We love to know the truth, even if it hurts us, and even if it's something which will bring us no benefit. So that's definitely a very good question, and I think we'll go into a lot more detail next time. So just to end, Jazakallah khair to everybody for joining us on SCDawah. I especially loved it that Mansoor jumped in and spiced it up as well. And next week at 5:30, we will have the show again. So from ourselves, from SCDawah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.